Let's begin with the foundations. This is another lecture. Today we examine the Costa Concordia disaster and the remarkable salvage that followed. A case where human decision-making, engineering, and environmental stewardship collided rather dramatically off Isola del Giglio in January 2012. I am Alexei, and I teach in Europe. We will proceed carefully and I hope lucidly, with a little dry humor to keep the bilge pumps of attention running.
Hi, I am Priyanka, a doctoral student. I am here to learn and to ask the simple questions that maybe help us see the structure of the story more clearly.
To frame our discussion, the Costa Concordia was a large cruise ship that deviated from its standard offshore route in January 2012 for what is colloquially called a sail by salute. It struck the charted reef Le Scole near Scola Piccola. The hull breach flooded generators and engines, power failed, and the vessel eventually heeled sharply to starboard and settled on a rocky ledge by Punta Gabbianara. 32 people died in the disaster, and a salvage diver later died in 2014 during recovery work. In simplest terms, a risky nearshore maneuver met an unforgiving coastline, and thereafter physics and gravity ruled the evening.
Maybe the best place to begin is by asking a simple question. What exactly is a sail by salute? And also, parbuckling and constructive total loss. Could we get plain analogies first, before the technicalities?
Of course, a sail by salute is essentially a showy close pass near shore to greet a place or people. Think of steering a bus very close to the curb to wave at friends, except the bus weighs over 100,000 tons and the curb is made of granite. Parbuckling is a controlled roll to right a capsized or heavily listed ship. Imagine you have a fallen wardrobe, and you loop straps over it and slowly roll it upright using winches, while supporting it so you do not crush its corners. A constructive total loss is an insurance term. Repairing the bus after it has met the granite curb would cost more than the repaired bus would be worth, so the insurer treats it as a total loss, even if it is still physically present. Now the more technical explanation. The salvage team, led by Titan Salvage and Michael Perry, built an underwater platform to create an artificial leveled seabed on the island's slope. They attached huge steel tanks called sponsons to the hull. With strand jacks and high-strength cables, they parbuckled. That is to say, they rolled the ship from its starboard cheek down on the rocks to an upright posture on the platform. Later, they attached sponsons on the starboard side as well, pumped water out of the sponsons to generate buoyancy, and refloated the hull to tow it to Genoa for dismantling. At this scale, it was a first, a case study in load management, seabed geotechnics, and continuous stability monitoring under adverse weather windows.
I often think about why stories like this matter beyond the headline. What were the stakes for safety rules and for the people involved?
It is important to understand the regulatory and legal reverberations. The disaster intensified attention to bridge resource management, to the timing and clarity of emergency communications, and to muster practices when many passengers have just embarked. Legally, Captain Francesco Schettino was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Costa Cruises and its parent face civil scrutiny and compensation dynamics, but, according to the record we have, no criminal charges. Moreover, environmental administrators had to protect the Pelagos sanctuary for Mediterranean marine mammals. That necessity shaped every engineering choice, from hot-tapping fuel removal to the decision to remove the wreck whole rather than cut it up in place. Let's start with the history. On an evening in January 2012, the ship left Civitavecchia with more than 3,200 passengers and just over 1,000 crew. At approximately 21:42 to 21:45, it struck Le Scole. The port side below the waterline was gashed, and strips of steel were later found on the seabed. Power failed as seawater submerged generators and engines. At 22:12, an initial report to the port of Livorno described an electrical blackout. Only later, at 22:26, did the captain report water ingress. By 22:44, the ship had settled heeled at a severe angle on a ledge by Punta Gabbianara. The abandoned ship order came at 22:50, and launching of some lifeboats was delayed as the starboard heel increased to the point that many davits on the high side were geometrically unusable. Helicopters, local ferries, and shore responders became critical to survival.
And the surprising details, the ones people still remember years later.
Two have lodged in the public imagination. First, the captain left the ship while hundreds remained aboard. The Italian Coast Guard, notably Captain Gregorio De Falco, ordered him in strong language to return at 1:46, and he did not. Second, in an eerie moment of maritime irony, passengers reported that the song from Titanic played in the dining hall around the time of impact. History sometimes insists on theatricality we would never write into fiction. Moving forward. My own enduring connection to this case is the engineering. Parbuckling at this mass, under environmental constraints, with real-time geodetic monitoring and pollution control, is the type of applied problem that makes one grateful for sober mathematics and good tide tables. But that brings us to the grande questions. When do human choices, technology, and organizational culture protect us? And when do they conspire against us? Let's proceed to the next point. Three questions will guide us. First, historically, what led to the navigation error that caused the disaster? Second, counterfactually, what if the navigation alarm had not been turned off? Third, prospectively, how should maritime operations evolve to prevent similar incidents? Big question one. What led to the navigation error? The record indicates that the captain ordered a close pass. Unlike a previous daylight sail past in 2011 that had company approval and greater offshore distance, this was at night and closer to the reefs. He stated he had turned off the navigation alarm and was navigating by sight. He also acknowledged judging the turn too late after noticing breakers on the reef. On the bridge were the ship's maître d'hôtel, a native of the island, and a dancer who later testified to a personal relationship with the captain. While not decisive alone, these details raise familiar flags about distractions, authority gradients, and bridge discipline. The initial communications downplayed the damage as an electrical problem, and this mischaracterization consumed golden minutes we could ill spare.
I am curious about the company context. Can we say that informal expectations about salutes might have influenced him, even if the formal route did not include such a pass?
It is worth noting the disputed terrain. Schettino claimed managers instructed him to perform the salute on that night. The company stated the 2012 course was not a programmed route. We therefore distinguish between culture and policy. A past-approved daylight pass in 2011 may have created an aura of permissibility, yet the 2012 nighttime approach lacked those safeguards. In bridge resource management terms, we observe failures of cross-checking, of challenge and response, and of respecting layered defenses. Turning off the alarm removed one layer. Relying on memory of seabed contours at night introduced cognitive overconfidence. And a multinational crew, many in service roles with limited Italian, complicated the execution once the emergency began. In simpler terms, the hazard was on the chart, waves were reportedly breaking on it, and a late turn, while overconfident and under-alarmed, proved insufficient. Thereafter, with power gone, the ship drifted. Some testimony suggests wind contributed significantly to the final perch on the ledge, while the captain argued he intended to beach the ship to save lives. The authorities later emphasized the role of prevailing winds. The point remains formally disputed in the record.
Building on that, big question 2. What if the navigation alarm had not been turned off? Would a timely alert have materially changed the outcome?
Theoretically, yes, and not merely theoretically. Alarms and guard zones exist to interrupt human error. With the alarm active, an earlier cue to the closing distance could have triggered a safe turn well before the hazard. The standard offshore route would, of course, have avoided the hazard entirely. These layered defenses are not ornamental. Redundancy across visual bearings, radar, ECDIS alarms, and well-rehearsed checklists allows one failure to be caught by another. In probability terms, you want independent barriers. Disabling one, then relying on a subjective nighttime sail-by compounds risk. In this context, we can infer that leaving alarms active would have increased the margin for a timely correction.
I am curious about other safeguards. If we imagine a more resilient bridge, what else might reduce the chance of this type of error?
Several categories present themselves. First, procedural. Formal voyage plans and nearshore approach checklists with explicit no-go margins, and a requirement that any deviation be approved in advance at daylight with proper pilotage. Second, technological. Do not silence alarms and ensure guard contours and safety depths are correctly set on electronic charts. Third, human factors. Cultivate a challenge culture where the officer of the watch can, without hesitation, say, "This is unsafe and we turn now." The first officer's comment about the captain asking for radar checks while lacking his glasses, if you will, illustrates why multiple eyes and tools are not optional frills, but core defenses. Next, let us transition to another aspect. Big question 3. How should maritime operations evolve to prevent similar incidents? We can propose an agenda without pretending to legislate it. Clarify and enforce policies that prohibit nighttime close-shore salutes. Tighten timing of muster training so that newly embarked passengers know where to go. Drill multilingual communication under stress. Design bridge systems to minimize alarm fatigue while keeping critical alerts unmistakable. And continue investing in salvage readiness so that when errors do occur, we reduce environmental and human harm swiftly.
What comes to mind next is the challenge side. These ideas sound good, but how hard is it to make them routine across multinational crews and varying companies?
The friction is real. Costs push against training hours, language diversity complicates drills, and normalcy bias encourages people to treat rare disasters as practically impossible. We therefore need research and practice in 3 areas. First, human factors on the bridge, including authority dynamics, standard phraseology, and the psychology of challenge under hierarchy. Second, alarm design that distinguishes nuisance from critical, reducing the temptation to silence. Third, codified protocols for nearshore maneuvers that include environmental constraints, pilotage where appropriate, and real-time shoreside oversight for deviations. The Costa Concordia recovery also teaches that when prevention fails, orchestration between salvers, Coast Guard, scientific agencies, and local communities is decisive.
To shift gears a bit, can we revisit the salvage phases briefly? The engineering choreography is, fascinating. And also, it shows how environmental stakes were integrated at each step.
Happily. After initial rescues and body recoveries under hazardous conditions, the priority became pollution prevention. Defueling by hot tapping began in mid-February 2012. Warmed fuel was pumped out while seawater entered from below to keep stability in check. Forward tanks were emptied first. Then access was cut to reach engine room stores. Completion came in March 2012 without a major spill. Environmental protection included exclusion zones, booms that had to be redesigned after high winds, a standby response vessel, scientific surveys by ISPRA's ship Astrea, and even the manual relocation of about 200 protected fan muscles to keep them clear of silt and hardware. Then came the long civil engineering phase. Platforms and grout bags created an artificial ledge. Port sponsons were installed, and parbuckling commenced in September 2013 and finished shortly thereafter. With the hull upright, starboard sponsons were attached. The ship was refloated in July 2014 and towed later that month to Genoa. Dismantling proceeded through 2016. The hull entered dry dock in September 2016. Final scrapping concluded in July 2017, with around 53,000 tons of material recycled. Post-removal seabed remediation on Giglio continued into 2018. Salvage costs alone approached $1.2 billion, and the overall disaster cost neared $2 billion. Extraordinary figures that, alas, track the complexity of lifting a wounded city block off a slope without poisoning a sanctuary.
And there was a diver's death in 2014 during recovery work, which is a sobering reminder that even after righting the hull, the interior remained dangerous.
Yes, a Spanish diver died after a leg injury sustained inside the wreck, the only fatality during the salvage proper. It underscores that these operations are not abstractions. They are carried out by people in black water, among floating furniture, in a structure that can shift underfoot. Even security proved non-trivial. Looters penetrated the wreck for items ranging from the ship's bell to artwork, despite exclusion zones.
So moving on, I think the next thing we should talk about is the evacuation and passengers. Roughly 600 had not yet done a muster drill, right? How did that shape the night?
Correct. About 600 had newly embarked and had not yet received the mandatory muster briefing. In quieter times, that schedule is legally permissible. In a fast-moving emergency with language diversity and failing lights, it is a disadvantage. Some early announcements framed the problem as an electrical fault and advised returning to cabins. Time was lost, and as the starboard heel increased, the geometry of safe lifeboat launching deteriorated. The low-side boats risked hull contact. The high-side boats became functionally unreachable. Thus, helicopters and local ferries were decisive. The rescue community performed admirably under pressure. By the early morning hours, extractions by hoist were still underway, and logs recorded evacuation completion before dawn, even as accounting for the missing continued thereafter.
Maybe it is just me, but the contrast between an approved daylight pass in 2011 and the 2012 attempt in darkness feels like a simple rule that should write itself. Daylight, distance, and procedure are not negotiable.
Arguably, that is the single clearest lesson. When an organization's informal rituals collide with formal safety systems, clarity must win. The 2011 pass occurred with company approval, at greater range and in daylight. The 2012 pass differed in all three respects. If we map risk as a function of proximity, timing, and oversight, small parameter changes can move one across the failure threshold. Mathematically, it was a poor optimization problem. Maximize spectacle subject to inadequate constraints.
That was helpful to think through, actually. Thank you for mapping it to parameters. It makes me wonder how we might teach this case to emphasize decision points rather than just outcomes.
In conclusion, The Costa Concordia disaster was a nearshore grounding after a route deviation, 32 lives lost, and later a diver in salvage. A ship declared a constructive total loss, an unprecedented parbuckling and refloat, and a long environmental restoration. We asked three questions. Why the navigation failed on the night? What might have changed had alarms remained active? And how maritime practice can evolve. For further study, consider comparisons with other passenger ship disasters and with large-scale salvage operations that chose different strategies, including leaving wrecks in situ. This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening, and may your alarms remain both audible and heeded.
So I guess that kind of sums it up. Thank you, Professor.